Alrighty, so here we've got my 2012 GT Distortion. I just picked up this bike in March of this year. It's, for what I can tell, it's a 2012 model. I was thinking it's 2012 or 2013, but I'm leaning more towards 12. It's a GT Distortion, as I just said. It's classified as an enduro, so it's got 140 millimeter travel in the front and 114 in the rear. It's kind of a weird combination even for the time, but it's really cool because it handles really well and it does a really good job for what it's worth. It's not like a full downhill bike. It's, as I was saying, it's classified as an enduro. It's kind of a weird bike because you can't really classify it to one facet. It's kind of it's more so a fun bike as opposed to a competitive bike from anything that I can tell, and that's okay because that's exactly what I wanted. So what I really liked about this bike was that it has like a medium travel to it, and it's also got this really nice top tube on the top of it. It's kind of like a slope stylish influenced frame. I can't say it absolutely is. I know that the second generation Distortion was a full-on slope style. I think that this one's likely to be in that realm. It's funny because the bike doesn't really belong to any facet. It's just a fun bike. I've heard people call it a trail bike before. I've heard people call it a lot of different stuff. It just doesn't fit one bill, but it's awesome because it's just fun. So I'm gonna move on from that point. So I'll tell you what I'm running right now. So as I bought this bike back in March 2021, I bought it off of Pink Bike. It was kind of an interesting experience because there's something that would have changed about it had I known before I went ahead and actually bought it. So I went into buying this knowing that it's a 1.0, so that means it's the highest trim or highest specs stock bike that you could have gotten for the Distortion. These bikes came in only two sizes, medium and large. And it was said on Pink Bike that it was a large frame. And I thought that out of the two that were for sale in the whole entire US on Pink Bike at that time, the other one was medium, and I thought that this was a large, so I thought I better opt towards the large frame. My other bike's a GT Caracorn, and it's a medium frame, and I kind of feel like at times like I've been like just within like the size of it, and maybe sometimes it seems like it might be a hair small. The more I ride it, the more I feel like it actually is fit to me, but I figured I was going to opt for the larger frame, and I was told that it was a one-owner bike, and it was close to stock, and the only thing that was replaced on it, this is, I quote you, the only thing that was replaced on it was the rear brake. So from the factory, these come with 180 millimeter rotors on it, so they're pretty fairly large brakes for not being a downhill bike. From the factory, they were supposed to be, I think, Formula R1 Pros or something like that. Seems like a weird brake that I've never encountered myself. Those were not on the bike at all. And the more I looked at the bike after I bought it, the more red flags I found about it and how I realized the guy was just lying to my face. So the brakes were completely different. I'm like, why? But he did say the rear one blew out and he had to replace it. So I could understand that one. I started riding it, and the front fork on this is a Fox Talus 32. So it's a 32-inch or millimeter stanchion, and then it's got adjustable travel being a Talus. I didn't realize how it worked, so I was just riding it, and then I looked at it one day, I'm like, it seems like that bike is riding awfully low in the front. I have to measure it. So I measured it, and it only came out to be 100 millimeter. I'm like, what the fuck is going on here? And I'm like, that guy freaking gypped me on the fork too, because a huge selling point for me is that the 1.0 spec for the bike. You got the Fox Talus, and it's 140 millimeters, I was saying, and it's 15 millimeter through axle, all that good stuff. And I was like, why is it so short? And then the more I play with it, I'm like, I'm freaking stupid. It's got adjustable suspension. So turn the valve, and then all of a sudden it goes, so that's kind of cool. Fortunately, I did the service on this fork, I didn't realize the tailless was so far off from the float. The floats are super, super basic forks, and you can do just about any service if you're just like focused enough on it and you have all the right materials and tools to do it. I figured that I would do a full service on it because I didn't know the history about it, and I didn't want to scratch my stanchions, and I just didn't want to fuck up the fork because I was just ignorant and wasn't taking good enough care of it. So I decided that it was in my best interest to take it apart and replace the seals and the lowers fluid, and it also called for float fluid, so I figured I'd buy that as well. So the lowers went perfect, the seal's perfect, got the driver for it, not a problem at all. And just about ready to go in for dinner, and I'm like, you know what, let me put the tailless stuff in. And I looked up some tutorials on YouTube, and it looked like a super easy service. There's like a couple of rods that pull out of it, a couple of sleeves, and then you pour 3 milliliters on one half, and then you push it down a little bit more, and you fill it with another 3 so it's even. And it was awesome. It was a super nice video, and it made complete sense. So I assumed that this was just about the same. The only difference I saw was like one of the knobs was slightly different, so I figured his was slightly newer. Come to find out, when I took this off, the cap off of it, everything, as soon as I lifted it, everything just exploded. I had springs flying everywhere and bearings. Little did I ever know that there was any of that shit going on in there. I just figured that you just pull the Schrader valve out and that was all it was going to be. No. So if you're ever in that boat, don't do it. The taillesses they were probably an okay fork at the time, but anything that I've learned from dealing with mine is they are not serviceable nearly as much as a float, and they do not sell parts for them anymore. Fox will not service it for you, and most people do not know how to service them. Fortunately, my friends that I met at Tuned MTB in Rochester, New York, I was able to call them up and ask for their opinion, and they told me I could bring it in and they could see what they do with it. And by some miracle, he was able to put the top cap back together. I spent like 2 hours trying to figure it out. He was able to top off the float fluid. I was trying to go from the top when you actually have the red at the top, and then you actually take the lower part of the leg or of the stanchion off, and you can actually put the float fluid in there. I was stupid, don't try it. So they just kind of finished the rest of the service off. They topped it off with fluid. They were super awesome, and their prices were like way better than I ever expected. So if you ever are in that boat, check them out. Alrighty, this is part 2 because I'm trying to go like one take on this. So as I was saying, I had the Fox fork serviced. It's always been a dream part of mine on a bike. I remember going to the Adirondacks when I was younger with my parents and my friend in first grade, and seeing people come up on the ski lifts at what was it, out towards Lake Placid at I think Whiteface or so, and it was so cool seeing these older dudes on these really sick bikes. And I remember seeing the Fox logo and the fork, and I also remember like reading magazines and seeing the Fox suspension on stuff. I was like, I have to have it. So that was a cool thing. Is it worth the money? The Fox stuff I really feel is like some really good shit, and as long as it's not a tailless, they should sell the parts for it, and they're really easy to surface from anything that I've seen. I haven't done it myself, however, being that it's the most likely part to fail are the seals and your O-rings. So it's a pretty basic setup, which is awesome. My next fork is going to be a float. No more taillesses. I'm done with them unless I get like a dirt cheap price on it and I can just run it to the ground. I don't see that happening though. So that brings me to the next part. When I checked this out, it was all sparkly glowy, and like I was so excited to buy it. I went to Ray's indoor mountain bike park, and I was so excited I could ride it and whatnot. And everything kind of checked out. I checked the chain, and I checked the cogs to see if the cassette was going to have to get replaced. You know, trying to do a little bit of due diligence to make sure that I wasn't going to get ripped off, and I could get a good price on it, make sure it was in line with what I was getting. So I checked that out, and I asked him about the wheels. I'm like, what kind of wheels are on this? I should have looked at the spec sheet from the factory, because this was a huge red flag for me. I should have investigated more. So learn from my mistakes. So from the factory, this bike came with, I think they were Easton EA 70 XCs or something like that, somewhere around that. And being a nice Easton wheel set, I think it was like an $800 wheel set from the factory. And guess what wasn't on the bike when I came to buy it? It wasn't advertised with those wheels in the listing, but that's a pretty significant bit that was taken off the bike. So instead I got these Mavics on it, and he told me they were Mavics, and that's all he told me. I figured they were a decent wheel, and they're not a bad wheel, but compared to what came off of it, they're shit. So they're, I think they're like MX319s, if I'm correct, and they're not a bad wheel. It's just, it sucks when I knew that the bike was so much better from the factory. So that was one thing. And I also checked out when I was there, I saw it and I knew it. I even talked about it on the phone before I even came out to check it out, was the tires were pretty much toast. They were Kenda Slant 6 tires, and the rear tire was just bald. It was terrible. I mean, I still ride it on one of my parts bin bikes, but for this bike, it just needed to get replaced. And having such a slim profile knob for any kind of trail riding or anything with mud, dirt, anything that's loose, it was a terrible tire for it. So I knew I was gonna have to replace it. So I did. So I ended up replacing the tires with these Maxxis High Roller 2s. I love my high rollers. I've had them before in the past on my Carogram, and they are freaking phenomenal tires. I haven't ridden a ton of other tires to be able to compare them, but like for my experience, they're so much better for the confidence that they give me, and the grip is a hell of a lot better than my Aspens I've used and those Slant 6s. Those were both like gravel tires. But enough on the tires. So another thing I was trying to talk about was this right here was the problem, or a problem. So from the factory, it came with a Fox RP 23. So it was a nice Fox float on the back. Guess what it didn't come with? A Fox float. So I got this RockShox Monarch RL. It seems like it's an okay shock. I got it not knowing that it needed to be serviced already. So it should have been like a dead giveaway when I went and rode it at the park, was the fact that this lockout was not working at all. The lockout didn't seem to make a difference. Right now it does not make a difference at all. So it needs to get serviced, and I know it. So it kind of sucks. But I'm looking to change it out for a Fox, not an Elite, but it's a newer shock. I'm not sure if I want to go with the one that's got the what is it called? Kashima coating. I think it would look nice on here, but it's like another $100 bucks. I'm already looking at a $300 shock. So, so this shock on this bike it's a 6.5 by 1.5 inch shock. So not a lot of travel, it's really short, but that's just what I'm looking for to put on there. What's really cool about this bike that I liked about it was, one, the frame. I wanted to buy one of these in high school. I never had the money to, and they're kind of a little bit of a unicorn to find. They're hard. They're kind of rare. I don't know why. And I didn't buy it because it was a rare bike. I bought it because it had like the geometry that I wanted. It was like a nice slope style bike. It had like that nice 66-degree head angle to it, and there's a full suspension bike. So that was all the stuff that I needed. That's what I was really looking for. And a really cool selling point of these bikes, especially for the time, is the iDrive on them. So essentially what it's got 4 headset bearings in there. They're 1 1/8 inch bearings, and it's got like 2 pivots, and the whole entire bottom bracket on these bikes actually floats underneath the frame. It's not connected to the frame between the rear triangle or the actual frame itself. It's got this little, it's the eye. It's this little piece right in between here, and it's what connects the bottom bracket to the frame. And then the bottom bracket connects to the triangle at the bottom. And the triangle also goes to the upper pivot here and also connects to the shock. It's kind of funny looking, but it's really cool. And one of the best parts about it is it's super easy to service. Like, I was intimidated to do it at first because I didn't have the right tools for it. 125 bucks later, I got myself a torque wrench so I didn't mess up the aluminum or the inserts to hold it all taut. So these are very, very crucial that you have torque to spec. They actually have the torque specs right on the triangles and on the frame, which is really helpful for shit. And it's super, super nice. And the more you do it, the quicker it is. You could do it probably within like 15 minutes. Replace all your bearings and re-grease stuff. They're all sealed bearings in there, so you don't really have to grease the bearings. You just get grease the outside and the frame. So super, super cool. I love the look of it. I love how it performs. And honestly, the selling point with the iDrive, as I was trying to mention, was it's supposed to be much better for when you're pedaling. It's a more efficient style of rear suspension linkage as opposed to other manufacturers, especially for the time. This was supposed to be a cut above the other competitors, I guess. I'm not super well versed in the other bikes, so I don't take everything as I'm saying it. I'm just giving my best opinion. But what's cool is it's that floating bottom bracket makes it way more efficient for pedaling, and you lose way less of your effort to the rear shock. Right now you lose a lot of it because the rear shock doesn't work for shit. It does not work. It's pogo sticking, and I didn't realize that's what it was doing until I talked to my suspension shop, and they're like, oh yeah, is it like a pogo stick? I'm like, it might just be. Yes, it is. So it's really cool. And what was I going to say with it? I think with the way that it compresses too with the iDrive, because this bottom bracket kind of just goes down a little bit, and it seems like it doesn't mess up your geometry of your drivetrain when it's under load quite as much. It's supposed to float, which is kind of cool. You can see it on other bikes when it doesn't, so cool part about it. One of the red flags that I ended up finding later was the fact that this bike came with a dropper post. Guess what it doesn't have? Freaking dropper post. And that would have been one of the most useful things on this bike, because the seat comes so low on this bike. If I were to buy a dropper, I was thinking I'd want like 150 millimeter or 175 millimeters, so I can have the seat sit about here-ish, so it's good for pedaling distance. And then when I'm ready to do some aggressive riding and whatnot, I could drop it all the way down to about like here, and that seat would be nowhere near anything. You would have no issues with it at all, period. It would be like the most open cockpit experience ever. So one day I'm probably gonna get a dropper for it, but I've dropped way too much money on this bike this year to justify it this year. So as I was saying, I don't know if I got screwed over on the deal. I definitely feel a bit more salty about it the more I think about it sometimes, but the way that I justify it is this is the exact bike I wanted. There were only two for sale, and I love it. It feels so comfortable, and I feel at home on it. So like, this is likely to be a lifer bike for me. So for the components that I got on it, I feel like I overpaid a little bit. I probably would have offered another $200 less if I did my due diligence and actually pointed out all the things that were different with it and wasn't just caught up in it emotionally. So it's definitely a good thing for the next bike that I buy. I'm just definitely going to take that in mind. So one of the weird problems I had with this bike. So I rode it the first couple of days, brought it back from Cleveland, Ohio, and it was good. The first day of riding, it was really nice. And the second day, I started to hear a little bit of a creak, so I'm like, okay, whatever. I figured it was drivetrain related, because when you get grit on your chain, it starts to creak. It does. So I looked at the cassette, and the cassette was like tarnished, black, and the chain was absolutely disgusting. So I just figured it was dirty. So I rode it a little bit longer on it like that. I already knew that the whole entire drivetrain was going to be replaced soon anyway. Didn't have a gauge yet for the chain stretch, but I knew it was going to have to get replaced. So I was like dumbfounded for how this thing was making all this noise. And it was so annoying, and it just got worse over time. So I ended up saying, you know what, I'm going to fix it. I bashed one of those gears at a skate park on accident, so I got this outer ring with another crankset from my other bike that I was building. So I just swapped it real quick, and it's nice, and now it works, doesn't skip, doesn't fall off. I also replaced the chain on here and a cassette with brand new stuff. No used shit, just brand new. Because I was just trying to rule out the problems. And it was still making that creaking, but it didn't always make it. It was intermittent. It only happened at certain times, and it was just the strangest experience I've ever had. on a bike trying to figure out why it makes noise. So I ended up replacing my bottom bracket. I'm like, bottom brackets do get really noisy when they get bad, and it only happened when I had load on the bike. Okay, so I replaced that with a nice Diora XT, only 25 bucks, so it's cheap. Tried that, still making the noise. You can bounce on the bike when you're not cranking on it, and it doesn't really make the noise very much. I was thinking before, oh, it's probably just the headset bearings and the suspension linkage, the pivots. They just had like a slight grit to them, barely. The other ones were nice and clean, so it's kind of strange. And the more I pieced it together, the more pieces I kind of like turned up and the more things I checked, the more I was like, damn, it's going to be what I don't want to replace on the bike. Ended up being the rear hub on the bike. What happened was the hub, it's a SRAM X7 from what I can tell, and it's got a nice removable hub body, and those are usually what you replace when it goes bad, because your pawls apparently go bad. I haven't had that problem before, so I figured, okay, let's see if I can find the part. Didn't buy it yet. I decided I was going to disassemble it. So I took all the cassette off, took the wheel off, took the cassette off, took the axle caps off of it, and I couldn't pull the hub body off straight off, which is weird. So I ended up bashing the hub axle through it a little bit because there's sealed bearings that ride on it. And eventually I was able to get the hub body off. And I looked at it and the pawls were actually really not in bad shape from what I could tell. And there was some metallic in there. I was like, this is kind of strange. And I looked at it and I'm like, the teeth seem to be okay for the ratcheting mechanism. And I'm like, I'll throw it back together just for now so I can ride it and figure out what's wrong with it. It might be salvageable. And it's not salvageable. Another story is, long story short, is it's not salvageable and I actually had to replace it. So I took it to my parts washer, my bin, threw some simple green through it, and the amount of metallic that came out of it was disgusting. There were little bits of fragments of metal, and once I cleaned it out and I looked at it, at first it was like, okay, I might be able to scrape by without doing it. And then I started to turn the wheel a little bit, and the teeth for the ratchets on the inside of the hub, the actual hub body itself, were so messed up. The teeth on them are flat. They're like a straight cut all the way around so that your pawls engage and they disengage the same height, and it's supposed to be uniform. Well, there were pieces on those ratchets that were sticking up randomly on there, like super high points, just randomly. So I realized what happened was the ratchet got chewed up. I'm guessing that the grease got washed out and it just got abused and neglected, and that's what happened. So, maybe not the smartest decision for me this year, or maybe not the most budget friendly, but I was thinking about replacing the rear hub, and the more I do this bike, the more I decide that I want to fix stuff myself, so I'll buy the tools to do it so I can service my stuff in the future. I really enjoy the mechanics. So at first I was like, I'll just replace the hub and I'll have a bike shop do it. Okay. And I started adding up the numbers, and it was like, say it's going to be about, I think, 130 bucks or so for like the cheapest estimate for building a wheel, or 50 bucks for the service, and then like 70 bucks for the hub. So like not a lot of money, but then I'm like, why don't I learn to do it? Because it looked so interesting, and I know a lot of people don't mess with it. So I was like, I just want to dig into it. But then I kind of got deterred from it because it's about $400 worth of equipment just to do it. And then you have to get your hub, and it was just, the money would just add up so quick with it. So I decided not to, and I just kept on riding as is. It still hasn't completely given out on me. I haven't had it skip yet, but I know once it gives out, it's going to be bad. I don't feel like eating shit over the handlebars, so I'm going to take care of it before it does pop, but I ended up finding some good deals on my used park tools and stuff. So I was able to get a tension gauge, wheel dish, a truing stand. I ended up buying a nipple driver. I bought all 4 of the keys for the spoke keys. I feel like there's something else that I probably bought too. At least 9 tools that I bought for just this job. And then I started looking into it a little bit, and that's when it turns into the bottomless and endless financial black hole. So I'm like, okay, what's a quality hub? I was like, okay, I'll go to a Shimano Diora XT, because most of the stuff on this is an XT, and I love the stuff, it's good. And I looked at it more, and it's center lock. I didn't really want center locks on this bike, because then I have to adapt it out. Not really what I'm interested in at the moment. So I could either go with this SRAM X7 that failed, as you can see, or I could upgrade it to something else. The XT wasn't quite enough for me to justify having to buy new spokes for it and the hub. So I looked into it and found that I wanted to go with either a DT 350 or a Hope Pro 4. And the DT was about, I don't know, 30, 40 bucks more, and I decided that I wanted to run the Hopes. They sound nice, and I saw a lot of great reviews about them. I asked one of my friends who's also a mechanic for biking, and he said that it's a hard one to go wrong with. He said the DTs are really good, that's what he runs, but I wanted to try the Hopes. So I ended up biting the bullet, and instead of just building the rear wheel, I had to have uniformity with my stuff. It drives me nuts if my wheels are different. It's just personal peeve. So I ended up buying both front and rear hubs, and then I figured if I'm gonna have these nice hubs, I may as well have nice hoops for it. So I ended up I found a good deal on some Spank Spoon 33s, or are they 32s? It might be 32s. But I found a good deal on them on Facebook. It was 85 bucks for both of them, and they're anodized blue. I thought it was a pretty color, and I didn't want to just cause the colors to clash. So I'm like, well, what other options do I have? And I found out they have the spike rims, Spike 33s, so they're Spike Race 33 Spank wheels, and they were just a better buy in my opinion for the price. The guy that was trying to sell those rims didn't want to give me any better of a deal on it, and he was super not helpful for helping me calculate the shipping on it. I was like, you know what, fuck this. I'm just going to go ahead and just buy some brand new rims. Hi. And I got my Spike 33s. So at the end of the day, I'm going to have about $1,000 in wheels between the tools and the components. So great biking crap, right? Anywho, so yeah, me just making things worse by making them better has led me to essentially invest in a $700 wheel set that I was not expecting to be building this year. However, being that it's going to be a gravity wheel setup, so it'll have nice engagement, it'll be durable, it's fully serviceable, the rims are double walled, so they're nice, they're a gravity hoop, so that's cool. 32 spoke, 26 inch. This is a 26 inch bike, by the way, because 2012. I love the 26. It just seems like it might be a little bit slower to pedal as opposed to my 29ers. It's got the same drivetrain. So that brings me to drivetrain. So right now what I'm running for a drivetrain, came on the bike and I actually really found that I really love it. It's a 10 speed in the back and a 3 speed in the front. So I have 2 derailleurs, and I know most people say just get rid of it and it's just better. I've actually found that I really enjoy the 3x myself. So it actually works really, really well. These Diora XT shifters are really, really nice, notchy and clicky and quick. So you can skip down 2 cogs at a time, and you can also jump up 2 at a time. The other side, you can skip down the cog sizes 2 at a time. You can pull the shifter frontward, or from the front to the back, or back to the front. So it's kind of cool. It's a It's a double action lever, so that's really cool. It's also, actually, I don't even really remember what the rear shifter is on this bike. I feel like it was a, yeah, okay, it actually is a Diora XT in the back too. I was like starting to question, I'm like, wait a minute. So yeah, it's also, it's a Diora XT in the front. A lot of people don't like to mess with these. I've actually found working on other bikes, I haven't taken this one apart yet, but I found working with front derailleurs, it's not quite as bad as I once thought. So I don't mind it. It's actually like a huge benefit to having 3x is when you lose momentum, you don't have to go up gears to make it easier to pedal. You can actually drop gears in the front so you don't get that crunching from the rear end when you're trying to step up underneath the load. Super, super nice feature of older bikes that a lot of people have kind of forgotten about. So I think I'm gonna keep this bike a 3x for a while. I almost might think I might swap cranks once in a while because my other bike's got the XT cranks. I might swap it with the other one because it's the same exact gears on it, except for the third cog I have a bash guard, so I don't have to worry about bothering it. But my brakes right now are just basic Shimano Hyper, actually they're not even Hyper, I'm saying, they don't, fuck, it's not even a thing. But there's basic hydraulics, and I found they're really nice to bleed. They're super easy to troubleshoot. Quite sure the reservoir on the front is leaky. I'm running mineral oil in the front right now, but they're super easy to bleed. You just get your syringe and you bleed it at the bottom, hook it up through the spigot at the bottom, break the bleeder, and you break open the top, put the funnel on the top, and you just push the fluid through it. Super easy, super, super, super easy to bleed. And they're kind of fun to do. I just have to do my rear one soon. It's getting a little bit soft. When I first bought it, the front one was super, 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 super soft, like barely usable. Since then, I've bled it and it's nice. And I haven't changed anything about the bar setup. I love the bar setup. I did change the grips from some Deity grips that were worn the hell out to some ODI Ruffman grips, I think they are. They've got the collars to them, so they kind of like a BMX vibe to them. I didn't have to have them, but I just kind of thought they were cool. The last person had some of the inside palm blocks. I don't know what you call them again. And I like the look of it, and I just decided to replace it with something similar. Completely black, and they just look really nice. I wanted ODI grips in my last bike when I was like 8th grade, never did it. So eventually I did with this one. So the seat that came on it was this really super generic, shitty GT seat, the self-branded one. That was certainly not to the bike. He just ripped it off of something else and threw it on here. And I actually got a really good deal on this seat. This is a WTB Wilderness Trail Bike Volt, and I love it. I went to the, what is the other one? It's Pure V is what I had. I had that on my trail bike before, and I loved it, but it started to get hard, and I wanted to replace that. So I took that one and put it on here for a while just to use it. And then I got a good deal on a newer Pure V, tried it on here. It felt comfortable except for the fact that it was too thick and too wide. So when I was trying to do like rougher riding where I'd be jumping over stuff, I feel it starting to chap the inside of my my thighs too much, and it was just annoying. So I ended up finding this one on Facebook for 20 bucks, and it's almost brand new. It looks super nice. The notch is still in nice condition, and it's got a little bit more bling to it because it's got the Volt on the top of it, but it makes a world of difference having the nice seat. And I think that's, I had to replace the pedals still. I just got some basic platforms when I bought the bike. I've put clipless on there, and it makes the bike look cooler, but for rough riding I'd rather have the platforms. But yeah, here's my nice disgusting money pit.